Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions today, please type them into the Q&A icon located in the bottom toolbar, and we'll answer them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to the June 28th edition of Crop Talk, and had a busy week. There's a lot of stuff happening, starting to go on in the fields out there right now, and things are, whether it be disease issues or insect issues or just noticing strange things in the field. So it's been busy and interesting, that's for sure. So one of the things that's come up that is kind of spiked in certain areas is the cereal armyworm, and I thought it would be good to get John Gavloski to come on this morning and give a little bit of an update on cereal armyworm and some of the I guess the things to look for when we're scouting for it, and maybe some of the life cycle and what we can expect going on from now. From there, we're going to go into crop update. I got a few slides of how crops are looking, what I've been seeing out in the field. And then there's been, I'm going to say, quite a few questions coming into our crop scouting panel. So hopefully we'll be able to get through them all today. And if not, we'll just have some carryover for next week or the week after. But try to get to all the ones that are kind of pressing and time, or right on time sort of thing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, and let's talk about cereal armyworm.
Okay, I'll just get my slideshow pulled up here, Lionel. You guys see this show, Lionel?
Yeah, just go to, exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect. Looks good.
Perfect. Okay. So what I'm going to go over is a little bit about armyworms.
Excuse me, John, 1 second.
Yes.
Sorry, you clicked stop sharing, not hide. So you have to share again, sir. All good.
Oh. Okay. Are we good now, or?
Nope.
You have to go through the whole procedure again, I think.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. 1 second. I'll try to get this shut down then. And
no worries. And then, and then on the bottom where it says stop sharing, just click hide.
All right, that's what I meant to hit.
You did, yeah. And then display settings, if you want to go up there and swap again.
Right.
And we should be good to go. There you go.
Should be good.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, yeah, just a few words about armyworms and why we have them and what you should be looking for and what you can use as thresholds. So first of all, armyworm, adult stage is a moth, and what's distinctive about them, and you might be able to see this in the slide, is they've got very light brown wings, but on each of their forewings there is a white dot. It's a small dot, but you can see that if you're looking for them. So for anybody who's seeing the moth or checking our pheromone beta traps, that's what you're looking for to ID an armyworm adult. And with the pheromone traps, don't assume every moth in there is an armyworm, because often a lot aren't, but that's what an armyworm adult looks like. Larva, the color varies greatly. Now, in my photo here, some of these are more of a greenish color. Sometimes they're almost a solid black, almost like a Bertha armyworm would be when they're in their black stage. So the color of the larvae can vary, which can make it really confusing for people who are doing their scouting. They usually do have some striping along the side. That's a bit distinctive. And they've got this almost Y-shaped pattern on their head caps. So the larva that is stretched out here, you can see these two darker brown lines on the head cap, so that almost form the letter Y. So that is something that is distinctive, and you'll see that in the older larvae really easy. So that's one way you can determine that as armyworms. And after they're done being larvae, they will turn into pupa cases. And we usually do get 2 cycles in Manitoba, but cycle number 1 is the one that causes all the damage. By the time we get to cycle number 2, probably the crops that they prefer to feed on are gone. And historically, that first cycle has been the biggest problem. Now, the moths themselves, they migrate in, and they have a purposeful migration, almost like a monarch butterfly has a purposeful migration. It's not just random being blown on the winds. Now, winds certainly would assist them, but they do migrate north. They overwinter in southern US and further south. Populations will build up there, and they will migrate north come springtime. And what we get is really a hit and miss situation. Some years we barely see them. Some years it's very localized. We've had years recently where just the eastern part of the province had issues and the west was spared. This year, not so lucky. It seems like a big population did migrate in, and not just to a particular part of the province, but I'm getting calls from every agricultural region on them. Northwest, Southwest, Central, Interlake, Eastern, you name it. There seems to be armyworms right now. Now, regarding what they will feed on, they would prefer either cereal grasses, wild grasses, or forage grasses. They like grasses, basically. And what they really like is a thick, dense grass stand to lay their eggs into. So often crops like fall rye, winter wheat are preferred egg-laying spots. Forage grasses as well, especially anything perennial or fall seeded, is going to be a preferred egg-laying spot, just because early on, if they're arriving in late May or early June, at that time, again, they're looking for a thick grassy stand to lay eggs into, and those crops are probably going to be really high on their list. But you will see them in spring cereals as well. I'm getting calls pretty much most of the cereal crops and forage grasses and even pastures this year. Now, there's other things they will feed on. If you're growing corn, they will feed on corn. Often we see more of them in the small grains, but every now and then we see a heavy population in a cornfield as well. So that's something to watch. As far as broadleaf plants go, much less of a concern, but there can be exceptions. So they will feed on things like beans. In this case, that's dry beans, but very rarely do we see them at high levels in dry beans. Same with peas. It would be a rarity. And I added flax and canola to the list, almost somewhat reluctantly, but I do know that they can feed on those, and they will if they need to, but it's not their preferred thing. So I don't want to be sending the message that they're a major pest of canola, because they're not. But that being said, historically, one of our years a couple of decades ago, when we did have some very high armyworm numbers, we did see them feeding in canola, not nearly to the same extent that they were in the cereals and forage grasses, but it is something that they will occasionally feed on. So it's something you can keep an eye on, but certainly not at the same risk as your cereal crops and forage grasses, but something maybe for later on in the season just to keep an eye on. Now, the armyworm themselves, they get to be about 3 to 3.5 centimeters long when they're fully grown. And as they get to be bigger and bigger caterpillars, they do more and more feeding. Now, the tricky part is when they get to that last stage, they will actually reach a point where they stop feeding, There'll still be a large caterpillar that is moving around, but they will stop feeding at kind of the midway point of that last stage. And they will clean their gut out, and they're basically getting ready to turn into a pupa at that point. So once they get to be fully grown, 3 to 3.5 centimeters long, they'll feed for a few days, clean out their gut, turn into a pupa, and then they're done. They're a pupa stage. And again, we can get that second cycle with them, but the larval feeding, at least at that time, it will be coming to an end. So if most of the caterpillars in your field are fully mature, and you notice that things are starting to diminish a little bit, that likely means they're starting to turn to pupa. And unless you've got a very severe population, sometimes when you get to that point, you can just ride it out. But that's what you have to be watching for. When they're really young, you might have trouble identifying them as an armyworm. They're tiny little things, and they're not hiding on the soil like they do when they're big guys. The first couple stages will be up on the leaves a bit more during the day. They skeletonize the leaf surface, and so their feeding looks a little bit different. But they just do that for a little while, and then as they get a bit bigger, they become the nocturnal creatures you're familiar with, where they're hiding on the soil during the day, coming up at night and feeding. And instead of just skeletonizing leaves, they're chewing away, usually from the leaf margins, and basically consuming the full leaf or a lot of leaf tissue. You'll see big ragged edges of the leaves, and sometimes eventually the leaves might disappear. So that's the way they feed. Again, it's mainly at night when they're larger. There are, Timothy seems to be a crop they really like. So anyone growing Timothy, something to watch for. And in Timothy, what we do notice is that they tend to do more head feeding earlier on than in other crops. With most of our cereals and forage grasses, they usually do most of their feeding on the leaves. And once the leaves are pretty much cleaned up, then they would go and start clipping heads. That's the normal pattern. With Timothy, they, for whatever reason, they seem to clip the green heads even when there's still foliage abundant on the plants. So if you're a Timothy grower, that's something you definitely want to watch for. Now, one of the questions I've been getting is, how long will they be larvae? How long till they turn into those pupa cases? And there has been work on this. There's been what we call life table studies done. They're older studies, but they should still be relevant to today, because this shouldn't have changed too much. And what they've done is they've measured how armyworms respond in growth at different temperatures. So if we look at 25 degrees Celsius, your larval stage lasts about 19 days on average. That was at a constant 25. 29 degrees, they developed a bit quicker. It was about 16 days. If we go down to 21 degrees, they will last about 26 days. So with the temperatures we've been getting, you're probably looking at somewhere at about 2.5 weeks, 2.5 to probably just short of 3 weeks for the larval stage. Now, if the egg laying was fairly uniform and your caterpillars are starting to get big, we've got it broken down by instars here. One thing you'll notice is some of their earlier stages, they go through them quickly. When they get to that last stage lasts a bit longer. So 6 days roughly for that last stage. But do keep in mind that the last couple of days of that, they're not feeding. So they'll feed for the first few days of that, and then the last couple of days, they'll stop feeding, clean out their gut, and that's what we call the pre-pupal stage. Then they turn into a pupa. So that's really how long they'll last. And then the pupa stage, temperatures that we're likely to get, you're probably looking at somewhere around 10 days as a pupa before they come out as adults and then start laying eggs again. So thresholds, how many is too many? In small grains, the general guideline is about 4 or more larvae per square foot. And I know quite a few fields people have been surpassing that. It is a fairly high threshold number, but there are fields that are very legitimately above that, and spraying going on in, again, almost all our regions to some degree as we speak. If the crop is heading, and if you are starting to see head clipping, drop that threshold to about 2 or more larvae per square foot. And in forage grasses, threshold is somewhat similar, about 5 or more larvae per square foot. And if it's a seedling crop, which probably doesn't apply right now, if you're in situations where early on you've got a seedling crop, the threshold would be 2 to 3 larvae per square foot. So for scouting techniques, now what you're looking for is mostly the larger larvae, and again, they're nocturnal. So when you get to an area that you want to assess, the easiest thing to do is measure out an area, give the plants in the area a bit of a shake just to knock any larvae that might still be present on the plants to the ground, should they be there. And then have a look very carefully on the soil for the larvae. And do keep in mind that they are good at hiding and they like to hide. So if you've got some trash or stubble on the soil, pull that away and look underneath the trash or the stubble, because if it's there, they will get underneath it. They would rather be underneath something hiding rather than exposed on the soil. So look under plant debris, lumps of soil, and sometimes they'll even get into cracks in the soil, which can make them really tricky to assess. But do have a good look on that soil surface, and especially underneath any debris that's there. Option 2 would be to go out at night with a flashlight and have a look. But most people probably are doing daytime scouting, and which you can do quite effectively as long as you're looking carefully on the ground. You don't need to be out there with your flashlight at night looking for them. Although if you want to catch them in the act of feeding, that's when you'll more likely see them. So a couple other things to keep in mind when you're scouting. They can be very patchy. And one of the reasons that they can be patchy is, again, I mentioned they like a nice, thick, dense, grassy canopy to lay their eggs into. So if there was any lodged areas of your field, plants that were kind of flattened or knocked down from rain or for whatever reason, you will, I'll say almost always find more of them in lodged areas. In fact, there's been times when people have reported that basically they had a patch of armyworms in their field, and the patch was strictly in a lodged area. The rest of the field pretty clean. That can happen. Sometimes they're a bit more uniformly distributed, but do look for patchiness in your fields, and especially if you've got lodged areas. That's probably a good place to start looking, because that's where you're going to find more of them. But do note that there might not be as many in some other areas. Also, if you see things like red-winged blackbirds or Franklin's gulls or something flying out of your field as you go by, you might want to go check where the birds were and see if by chance you've got armyworms, because birds do like to feed on them, especially once they know they're there. If the armyworms are in a patch in the field, the birds will find them. And sometimes that can be a good clue that there's something going on. As mentioned, if you see a big flock of red-winged blackbirds or gulls or something fly out of a patch of your field as you're going by, not a bad idea to take a walk in and see why were there those birds there. And I've done that myself before, and have been able to find armyworm patches just by going to where I saw a flock of birds leave a field. It's not always the case. They might be feeding on something else, but sometimes that can be a good way to find those patches. So if you are above threshold, again, keep in mind that things can be patchy, and that these are nocturnal caterpillars. So if you do need to be spraying, late in the day or in the evening is preferred timing, just because they will be hiding during the day. you'll get better contact, and they'll be feeding on freshly applied insecticide if you do it in the evening. And I mentioned earlier too, I do consider the staging when you're doing your scouting. If they're turning into pupa, or you notice very high levels of parasitism in the field, that might be something that you want to consider in your decision making. And I'll get to parasitism at the end of my presentation, show you what to be looking for there. So as far as scouting for the adults, we do put up pheromone baited traps early in the season. Now this year we had a glitch where we had trouble getting enough of the proper traps. So some people had the traps from last year and had them out early. Other people, it was well into June before we were able to get traps up. And some of the traps we had up in the eastern region early were picking up some fairly heavy levels of armyworms in the last week of May and in early June. So I was expecting high levels in the east. I was kind of caught off guard by the high levels in the west. We do have some traps up. We do have a few more up now that we had our supply arrive. These are a good early warning tool, but sometimes your best advice is just once we start seeing larvae like this, use that as your guideline. Right now, scout for armyworms. The traps are a good tool early on just to get people looking. But I think we're at the point now where regardless of trap counts, you should be looking for armyworms if you're growing cereals or forage grasses. Now, regarding the parasitism I talked about, I'm just starting to get people sending in photos of these things at the top of their cereal and forage grasses. So these are not eggs. These are pupal clusters of a parasitoid called Cotesia. And in the little insert here, I'm showing the adult stage. They're a very tiny little black wasp. In fact, when you're out sweeping crops and you get these little black things in your net, a lot of people probably think they're some type of little fly. A lot of times they're parasitic wasps, and Cotesia is one that can be quite prevalent here. They like cutworms and armyworms and things like that. And they don't just lay one egg into a caterpillar, they lay a whole bunch of eggs into a caterpillar. And the eggs are all the same age, so that the caterpillars or the larvae of the parasitoids are living and eating inside the caterpillar. So you got a whole bunch of them living and eating inside the caterpillar, all the same age. And when they're ready to emerge from the caterpillar, it happens instantaneously. And so the picture that I'm showing here is poor little armyworm that we were keeping in our lab that had Cotesia, and we were able to witness basically dozens of the Cotesia coming out of its body all at the same time. And then they usually form this cluster of pupal cases at the top of a plant. And so if you start seeing that in your field soon, that's what's happening there. Now, the other thing you might notice if you're scouting armyworms, the odd one might have a white egg on the side of its body. So this little white spot near the arrow, that's an egg of a fly. They're called tachinid flies, and they're hairy flies that like to lay eggs on caterpillars. In this case, it's usually just 1 or 2 or 3 eggs. It's not as many as Cotesia. But when the egg hatches, the larva of the fly gets inside the armyworm and is eating it from the inside, and same thing, ends up killing the armyworm eventually. Sometimes you can notice a lot of eggs on the side of caterpillars. And if you're kind of borderline threshold, but you're seeing a lot of signs of parasitism, that might be something you can factor into your decision making. If you're well above threshold, like some of the fields, then you got to spray regardless. As far as predators that like to eat armyworms, one of the groups that eats a lot is the ground beetles. And what the photo I have here, it's a species of ground beetle called the fiery hunter, or Calisoma is the scientific name. And they're relatively large ground beetles. I've actually been seeing a lot of them in some of the fields this year. and they're they will eat several armyworms or cutworms in a day. They're larger ground beetles, big appetites, so they're good guys. Rove beetles, they're a bit smaller than the ground beetles, very numerous. Probably one of our more underestimated predatory groups of beetles, but they will eat small armyworms and um, uh, probably the bigger caterpillars would be too much for a rove beetle because they're a smaller beetle, but the smaller ones they would eat. There are certain predatory bugs as well, like damsel bugs, that small caterpillars are a favorite food of theirs. Wolf spiders will also eat armyworms, and I mentioned already birds. So there are some things that will be helping to try to clean up your mess of armyworms. It's just a matter of how many of the good guys you've got and whether or not they can keep ahead of the armyworms. So maybe I'll end with that, and I'll take any questions that people might have.
Okay, John. One of the questions is being that the season seems to be earlier than average. What are your thoughts on the second population being in effect later on in the season?
So yeah, very good point. And you're right. Things are, I would say, at least a good week ahead of where they normally would be. Now with armyworms, they migrate in. So when they migrate in is a big factor, but also they're going through this first cycle quicker than they may otherwise have. Um, so I think by the time second generation comes out, probably a lot of our cereal crops will be too far advanced to be really attractive to them. I know the wheat in my plots at the research farm here is already flowering. And so the insects are developing quicker than they normally would, but so are the crops. Um, Now, one thing to be careful of, if you do have, say, forage grasses that still might be green as we go into August, um, and possibly some of the other host crops, but I'm not as worried about things like canola and flax. We can see them in there. Um, I'm thinking more pasture grasses, some of the forage grasses. We might want to watch carefully for that second um, cycle. But usually, historically, it hasn't been as big a concern as the first cycle. Now, whether that's parasitism related or crop staging, it's hard to know, but that's historically been the trend.
Okay. Is it okay to sweep for armyworms? And if so, how many intense 10 sweeps would be a concern?
What sweeping would accomplish is you might get the odd young one and you might get the odd one, but keep in mind these are nocturnal creatures that during the day like to hide under debris in the soil. So if by chance you are sweeping and you're getting some, really all that's telling you is it's time to look on the ground and see what's really there. There are no thresholds based on sweep netting because it's not really a recommended sampling technique. Again, for nocturnal caterpillar, um, visual counts are really what you need to do to make decisions. We don't have numbers for sweep net sampling.
Okay. And John is fairly busy, and I had another question come in for him during the scouting panel, so I'm just going to go to that one right now. And wheat stem maggot, I guess maybe you can explain what it does, John. And then the question that came in was, guy was looking at different winter wheat varieties, and he was seeing that one variety seemed to be having more wheat stem maggot in it than the other varieties. Have you seen something like that, or do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so with our modern varieties, I can't really say that I can pick out a variety that is more resistant or more susceptible. There's been some old studies on susceptibility of varieties to wheat stem maggot. And with those older studies, what they did find was that the wheat stem maggots preferred to lay their eggs on varieties with more tillers. So now I'm not sure what the tillering is of these varieties that you're seeing, but that's what they found with some of the older studies. The varieties that produced a lot of tillers seem to have more of the stem maggots than the ones with fewer tillers. But that's really the only research that I'm aware of looking at varieties of wheat and wheat stem maggot. And very good photos, by the way. You can kind of see this wheat head near the end of the stem, where it probably pulled out really easily. You can kind of see that it's been chewed away at, and we can what they do. The larvae live right inside the stem, and eventually their chewing will break that stem, so that the head will die, but everything below that that part that's been fed on is still green. So you've got this white head, everything below it's green, and that white head will pull out really easily. And so if anyone's confused about is this or isn't it wheat stem maggot, just give that head a very gentle tug, and if it slides out really easy, then it's wheat stem maggot that you're looking at.
Okay. A couple more questions have come in. Does dimethoate have any activity on armyworm?
It's not registered for. It's, you know, you don't see a lot of Lepidoptera or caterpillars on the dimethoate labels. There are some tree feeding caterpillars on the label, but when you look at the field crop uses, I mean, grasshoppers are on there. There's a lot of sap feeding insects on the label. You don't see a lot of Lepidoptera on there. So I can't say that it wouldn't work. It's not registered for armyworms, but it's odd that there aren't. When you look at things like Bertha armyworm, diamondback moth, I mean, none of those are on the dimethoate labels. There just aren't a lot of caterpillars in field crops on dimethoate labels. So I'd be careful about using it. I can't say that it won't work, but I can't really vouch that it will either, because I haven't seen research regarding dimethoate and armyworms.
Okay, and another question. Somebody sent in a couple thoughts about spraying. How mobile is the armyworm? I guess after they finished an area, probably wondering if they travel. I've been getting a lot of calls about going from one field to the other field, and the question is, can you strip spray, or do you need to do the entire field? Also, what kind of products are most effective?
Okay, so good questions. Okay, so first of all, their mobility. They are called armyworms for a reason, because when they have heavily defoliated an area, they will move to greener areas, greener pastures. They often will do that as a group. You will see them moving as a big group, which is why they get this name armyworms. And sometimes you'll see them crossing the road from a heavily defoliated field to a greener either ditch area or field. So they are mobile enough that they will go, say, across a road or something to another field. They're not going to go miles. They're caterpillars. They can't go far, but they will move as a group to find better food when they need to. Now, regarding strip spraying, I haven't seen any research on strip spraying with armyworms. Grasshoppers, yes, it can be an effective technique. There's some very good data for strip spraying for grasshoppers on pastures. Armyworms, haven't seen any data one way or another on it. They're probably, until they've heavily defoliated an area, they're probably not moving around to the same degree that grasshoppers would be. So I'd be careful using strip spraying for armyworms. I can't say that it would work. I haven't seen any data on it. As far as products go, I know this gets tricky too, because especially now that lambda cyhalothrin is not an option for many, your options are getting slim. And now Matador silencer, if you 100% know that it's going to be not for animal feed, it could be an option. But if you're not quite sure, I would keep away from that. Coragen is a very effective product, very good residual, but it's also more expensive than some of the other alternatives. So I know that's part of the conundrum that some people are in. Some of the other products registered, Adela gets registered, but it's also a more expensive product. It's more of a Hort product, so I don't think that's an option for some. Malathion is registered. I'm not sure that it gets a lot of use. Coragen's probably the preferred product for a lot of people. Other than that, there's not a lot registered for armyworms, unfortunately.
Okay, and then one of the questions that I've been getting is, especially from a couple producers that have canola fields that were up against fall rye fields, and the fall rye fields have been just well, I guess you've seen the pictures, John. They're just lots of numbers of armyworms. So they're wondering are those armyworms have the potential of moving into their canola, even though they may not like the canola? If that's the next crop and the numbers are so high, are they going to be an issue there?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a really tough one to answer because we don't have a lot of data to go with. Aside from the fact that I know from previous bad armyworm years that you will see them. The potential is there that they can move into canola and feed. We have seen it happen previously, not commonly, but it can happen. And so I think a lot depends on how badly chewed up is the field that they're in and what is around that field. I mean, if to the other side of, say it's a rye field, to the other side there is a more preferred host crop or even a ditch with a lot of lush green vegetation, they may prefer to go there than the canola crop. Canola is not high on their list, but if, say, the rye crop was really chewed up and there's not a lot of green ditch vegetation to entice them, potentially they could. So I would just keep an eye on that canola, and I would keep an eye on the movement of the armyworms, because again, they're going to move as larvae in a big group. They'll go across that road. If you do see that happening and you see them moving into the canola, you might be able to get away with just doing an edge spray along the canola where they're moving in. Hopefully you don't have to do a whole field. If you can catch it in time, if you are aware that this movement is happening and they are getting into the canola, I would do an edge spray along that canola just to make sure that they're not going to move further in and do more damage. Not common, but it can happen, so just keep an eye on it.
Okay, and another question has come in is, how many generations of armyworm would you see this year?
I'm going to say 2, because they came in, like that first flush of adults seemed to arrive very late May, early June. And based on the way their cycles work, we should see 2 generations of them this year. So larva twice.
Okay.
But as mentioned, that second batch of larvae historically has not been as big a concern as the first. I think once we get through the next couple of weeks, it probably will be much less of an issue. But I think the next probably about 2 weeks are going to be where we need to be really cautious with the armyworms.
Okay, and I just got an email while we were talking from someone saying that they're seeing a lot more of the alfalfa seed weevil and a lot of cutting is happening, but the rain isn't helping, is what they said. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one too. So alfalfa weevil, yeah, they're green beetle larvae that white stripe down the back, like to feed up high on the alfalfa. Early cutting is a really good way to deal with them, because what happens is they either desiccate or starve to death after the cut. Now, when you get a lot of rain, 2 things: they're not going to desiccate as quickly, and if the regrowth is happening super quick, sometimes they will get on that regrowth, and that becomes an issue. So do keep an eye on the regrowth. Sometimes you'll get really good kill from that cut, but if you don't, just keep an eye on how much feeding they might do on that regrowth.
Okay, good point there, John. Great, thank you, John. Thanks for putting this stuff together and for answering the questions. A lot of really good information came out of that, so thanks again.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is while I'm into the panel part of the presentation, I'm just going to keep going with the questions that have been coming in, and then we'll see if we have any time at the end to do a little bit of a crop update. But I think some of the questions are pretty good, so I think we need to maybe address them. So the next one is going to be for David Kaminsky, and the question was about spraying his oats. The producer was looking at seeing different things happening in his oats field, and he was wondering about the rust situation. So I thought maybe David, if you could maybe give us an update of what you've been hearing and seeing about rust in fields, and maybe a couple comments on some of the other things that might be happening in some of the pictures that are on the slide.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Lionel. The pictures on the slide, all of those appear to be either bacterial leaf spot, particularly the one in the lower right, possibly the one in the middle with the necrosis on the ends of the leaves, the one down in the bottom left with some white stippling might actually be insect feeding. I don't see any signs of rust. Crown rust is the most common one on oats on any of these pictures. And neither have I been out to visit any of the alternate host, the buckthorn. I usually do that every spring, but we've been scrambling to get ready for the diagnostic school, and I haven't done that. As far as winds from the south that might be carrying rust spores into the area, those would be the spores, which come off of oat crops that are maturing to the south of us. There has been nothing as far as significant reports of oat crown rust coming up from the regions where it would be most likely found south of us in the United States.
Okay, and how quick can it come up? I know the producer I was talking to is last year. I think I had you out to his field, and it kind of surprised him how fast it happened. It was kind of like it wasn't there, and then all of a sudden, or it was there in small amounts, and then all of a sudden it was a big issue. So that's what he was wondering, if he should be more on the preventative side, or how fast could something like this move up?
Mm-hmm. Well, especially if there is a local source of inoculum like the buckthorn, and I think in that area, I didn't scout it, but I expect anywhere along the Souris River, you'll find lots of buckthorn. The infection can start early, be down within the canopy and not really noticeable, but the development of further infections and cycling of spores within the oat crop can be very rapid, especially under warmer conditions. You need a little bit of humidity there, but the crop canopy provides that. I seem to think that the later part of the summer last year was on the warmer side. Not quite as warm as it's been so far this year. But yeah, it can develop quite quickly in the crop. You might take the philosophy, if you've seen it before on oat crops in your area, that a fungicide might be warranted. And it's most important to try and keep the flag leaf clean, although this is a rust that does quite a bit of damage on the stems as well. And the stems are photosynthetic area, excuse me, for helping with grain filling. The majority comes from the flag leaf, maybe the one below, but also if the stem browns before the crop has reached physiological maturity, you may see some shriveling of grain and even yield loss. Looking in the guide to field crop protection, the table for oats, rye, and triticale, you scan down the column under crown rust, and just about every product that is registered on oats is effective in controlling crown rust. So you have a lot of choices. Many of them are the same active ingredient, but there are only a handful that you should watch out for that might not be worthwhile.
Okay, good. Thanks, David.
Yep, you're welcome.
Actually, while I have you on, though, I was in wheat field yesterday, and the lower leaves starting to see a little bit of disease showing up, and just thought maybe you'd want to make a comment just for people that are out scouting, kind of the difference between, say, tan spot and septoria.
Okay. If I had to guess just based on the picture, I would expect that illustration on the left to be of septoria leaf spot. The reason I say that is that tan spot thrives in cooler temperatures, which we have not had. You'll generally find it lower down within the canopy, smaller spots, and often with kind of a bright yellow halo. A larger spot like this, I can't see pycnidia in the picture, but if you look close with a magnifier, you might see those. And it is probably septoria. Now the heads on the right, those have flowered already fully. And if that was the case and you hadn't sprayed a fungicide for Fusarium head blight, I might have mentioned this last week already. In this case, the horse is out of the barn. If infection took place, you're not going to stop it. And if it didn't, there really is no benefit from applying a fungicide at that late stage.
Good. Thanks for pointing that out, Dave. That's always a good comment to remind people regarding the staging there.
Okay.
While we're talking about leaves and flag leaves, the question for Anne regarding the size of the flag leaf and how it may affect yield. Some producers have been saying that the flag leaves on their wheat and barley aren't maybe as big as they normally would be, and they were concerned and probably because of some of the drier conditions in some of the places, and they're wondering if that may have a overall effect on yield, or how important is that size of the flag leaf for yield?
Sure. Yeah, the size of the flag leaf is important for yield. So in all cereal crops, the top three leaves, especially the flag leaf and the head and the stem between the flag leaf and the head, are the primary source of carbohydrates for the plant when it's photosynthesizing. So the flag leaf is thought to contribute about 50% of the grain yield, really just depending on the seasonal conditions. So in a year where we're having drought conditions and we're seeing that smaller flag leaf, you would expect a yield reduction just because the plant isn't able to capture as much sunlight and photosynthesize as much with that smaller flag leaf. But especially for barley, it's important to consider that the head can also contribute a lot in terms of photosynthesizing. So barley has some nice long awns that are green, and those can contribute, can have a significant impact on the amount of carbohydrates produced in the plant. So under drought conditions, you would definitely see an effect with that smaller flag leaf on grain filling. But it's not just the flag leaf. So you need to consider all of the top parts of the plant.
Okay, so the flag leaf and basically with the next leaf down too would probably help out as well, right?
Yeah, like in drought conditions, you often obviously see the plants dying down from the bottom first. So the flag leaf would be the last one to stay green. And that's for a reason, just because it does contribute so much to grain yield. And in these dry conditions, you'd be expecting lower grain yield because we're having smaller leaf area and the plant's just not able to take up as much water and nutrients. So yes, if your plant is drought stressed, that smaller flag leaf will impact grain yield.
Okay, good. Thanks, Anne. David, I think we talked about this yesterday and was just wondering if you were able to get or have any thoughts of what might be happening to these wheat leaves, flag leaves. It's close to flowering. Most of the field looks good except for some of the discolored leaves. the leaves are browning with a striping pattern. The plant next to them is healthy. Did you get a chance to figure out what might be the problem there?
I was in the field yesterday and there were a lot of emails coming through, and I probably didn't even look at these pictures, I'm afraid, Lionel.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I was but when I was looking at it, I was seeing the striping, and I don't know, one of the comments or one of the things I was thinking of is I was wondering how long ago in the rotation there might have been winter wheat, and if there was maybe some volunteer winter wheat that was coming through. Last year it was canola. And so I was thinking maybe you can get the odd plant that maybe still get some wheat streak mosaic showing through, or
Yeah,
it could be just
I think that would be a very long shot, Lionel.
Yeah.
Wouldn't fit the pattern of wheat streak mosaic and how it is vectored from crop to crop by the wheat curl mite. I wonder if it isn't more of a nutritional thing than any kind of pathogenic disease.
Okay. The person that sent the information in, or the pictures in, was saying the plant right next to him, like the leaves on the right hand side were nice and green, and so
Yeah,
it's just a few plants in the field that are showing these kind of symptoms.
right. Couldn't pin it down just based on the symptoms, but if that is the pattern, I wouldn't be concerned about it as far as potential for yield loss.
Yeah, no, I think that's what we both agreed on, that it was probably, sometimes you just can't explain everything that's going on in the field. There's so many things happening, but it didn't look
Yeah.
like it was going to affect yield because it was very few plants, and sometimes things are happening out in the field, you just can't figure everything out. So
True. I did briefly glance at a text of the many that came through, and the person was talking about a symptom that was almost like a needle in the haystack, probably affecting less than 1 in 100 plants. So
yeah,
not likely to have a yield impact.
good. Okay, thanks, David.
Okay.
A question for Kim, and maybe I guess I was just looking for some comments on, we're in the season right now where we're starting to assess a lot of the, our seeding and our spraying and everything, and we're starting to see maybe the odd problem with maybe some herbicide drift, and was wondering if Kim can make maybe a few comments on, how she would give some advice to somebody that might be experiencing some herbicide drift.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. Yeah, this is the time of year to start looking that we can have drift earlier on as well from some of our earlier applications as well. But this is the time of year that you need to start looking at what went wrong. So either a crop is damaged and it shouldn't be, or there's weeds that died or that didn't die and they should have. So this is when we start trying to diagnose, okay, what went wrong, either with the crop or with the weeds or whatever. So there's a number of things that can go wrong when we see crop that's damaged that shouldn't have been. We can look at drift. We can look at whether it was a misapplication. We can look at whether there was something like either misapplication, either in a wrong rate or beyond the proper stage of timing or something like that. So we start looking at that. If you think it's somebody else, there's some drift on your crop, usually we wouldn't see that damage throughout the whole field. If you had damage throughout an entire field, that's probably a misapplication more than a drift. But drift is usually very directional. It'll be on one side of the crop and not very, and especially the symptoms will be strongest right on the edge of the crop, and they kind of fade away as you get further into the field from that side. So you start looking at things like that and trying to determine how much trying to determine like whether or not this is a drift issue and what it could possibly be. Obviously, you look at the crop right next to your crop that's affected. What was it? What was it and what could possibly have been sprayed in that crop? So, you look from there, and, if you're thinking that there isn't anything else it could be except drift based on the patterns of the damage and the type of damage it is, if you can kind of figure out, is it a is it a group 4 damage on your canola? Is it a case of Roundup damage? There's some very distinctive things that we look for in coloring, and the different herbicide groups have very different symptomology when they're in damage, whether it's on a crop or a weed or whatever. So, if you determine that maybe it could have been a drift, the first thing to do would be to talk to your neighbor. If it's somebody next to you that could possibly have drifted, find out what they sprayed, when they sprayed. Ideally, you want to come to, if there has been some damage, you want to come to an agreement on that, of whether there's any compensation involved, and that's going to be between you and the person who did the drifting. And then after that, if you're having trouble, lots of times if there is going to be compensation involved, and that's when you get your insurance companies involved, because everybody will have insurance for these reasons. And if it's a commercial applicator, then of course they have insurance as well. We do have a form available through Manitoba Agriculture. We can send it out. It's really meant for commercial applicators, but it's still a good idea to you can still use that form even if it's a farmer to farmer issue. It's just basically you need to capture as much information as you can about the spraying and the time of spraying. We can go back, you can go back through records, weather records, and find out what weather records were on that day that the spraying occurred, if it is a drift issue. But otherwise, document everything as much as you can right now. We always get these calls in the fall where a crop doesn't do well, and now they think it's drift that possibly happened, a couple of months prior to that. It's very difficult at that point to diagnose anything. You need to have pictures. If you have damaged plants, you can either press them and dry them, or ideally throw them in the freezer, like label them really well. Take a sample of the good plants and the bad plants, so the good and bad. I'm not really a fan of sending things away for residue analysis, because that's kind of it's really hard to know what to do with the analysis when it comes back. You may find some parts per million of certain herbicides. You have to know what you're looking for. But again, we still can't tell you whether or not that's, what caused the problem. We don't really know. Nobody really knows what those numbers mean, other than the fact that they can find traces of pesticides, but you have to be very specific about what you're looking for. Either way, if you've got some samples saved, like I said, throw them in a freezer, label them clearly, get some samples of the damaged plants as well as samples of the non-damaged plants. Try to estimate as well how much area was affected. Again, these are things that, when it comes in the fall, and if, you're on the combine and you think that there was some damage from a drift, it's just really hard to handle anything at that point. So that's dealing with drift. Just another thing, and maybe we can talk about it more next week too when we have more time. But if we do have some weed escapes or some weeds that just didn't die, we need to start looking at whether or not we have some resistance issues. And again, this is where we need to look at your documents. And when was it sprayed? What were conditions like? At the end of the day, we try to determine what happened and what went wrong, whether it's a drift issue or an issue with some weeds that didn't die. We need to, again, document everything, look at all of the information that you have, and capture as much information now as you can through plant samples, through photos. Get the info now. A lot of times with drift, if it's sublethal drift, the crop is usually not affected very much, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really make that much of a economic difference when you pull those combines in the field. But still, you need to get that information now, and hopefully, and most of these cases can be resolved quite easily. But again, if it's something that is a bigger issue, or you're not able to resolve it, just on a personal basis, then it's time to get your insurance companies involved on both sides there.
Great. Thanks, Kim. That was good information, and I agree with you right there, is try to compile as much information as you can, and to get pictures and save samples. I think that's the key to a whole bunch of those things. So thanks again. A couple of questions have come in, and one of the questions was regarding the hail that's gone through the last little while here, and the storm that went through last night, or the night, I guess the last 2 nights, there's been two types of hail damage that occurred. I think a lot of the cases right now are still isolated under thunder showers that have gone through, so they haven't been like huge events where they've taken out a lot of crop, and a lot of the hail has been fairly small. There has been some larger areas, which again will be very isolated, but some of the bigger areas, the hail's been fairly small and has done some damage. But I think a lot of the crop is still in the stage where we wouldn't see a lot of damage as of yet. Again, depending on the size of hail and the amount of hail, but I think right now a lot of it is going to be still a wait and see. A question has come in, and maybe Kim, you can help me with this one. When a crop has had hail damage, not serious damage, just some tearing in the leaves, is there a certain amount of time that one should wait before using a herbicide like Liberty in crop on canola?
Yeah, that's not an easy one to answer, but I'd treat it as if, we maybe had a touch of frost on them. We don't want to go on those plants when they've just received a bit of stress. We want to give them a few days to recover a bit, wait and see, especially if there's been some hail damage. You want to see how extensive that damage is. But you don't want to be going in there right after a stress event, whether it's, a touch of frost earlier on in the spring or a hail event. You don't want to go in there when those plants are newly stressed and hit them with a herbicide. They are tolerant to the herbicide, but they're not immune to it. So we need to give them a few days to recover. So in between herbicide applications, you want to give yourself at least 10 days anyways in between, which I think we're at. But I know a lot of guys are putting on that last Liberty spray or a last glyphosate spray in soybeans and that type of thing. So I'd still give it a few days and let it recover a little bit. And I'd be very careful. I wouldn't be putting a lot of hot mixtures in. If I'm doing a Liberty, I'd be using 15, 20 gallons of water, lots of good coverage because we've got bigger plants by now. Our weeds are going to be bigger too. We're going after those last weeds, so probably bigger. So water is your friend. It's the cheapest thing you put in the spray tank because it's free. And I would be putting a lot of water on because that's going to help mitigate any stress coming from that herbicide application. But I would wait a few days. But again, I know you can't wait too long because with these rains, our crops are really going to take off and cabbage over and that. So, but give it as much time as you can and use lots and lots of water, and that's going to help the situation as much as you can.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Good comments. Okay, just a few slides now to finish off the day. We mentioned again a couple of times about the field crop production guide, so I think it's definitely something we should be using as much as we can. Tours coming up for our crop diversification centers. There's the dates for the 4 different centers, and next week we're going to be actually having an extended version of CropTalk. We're going to have the managers of each of the centers give us a preview of what we'll be seeing on their tours. So definitely a CropTalk to be marking on your calendar, because be able to see what's happening at each of the centers and then mark your days which you want to go and attend those ones. Crop diagnostic school. I know David and all the guys in Carmen have been very, very busy working on getting this ready for everybody. As my understanding right now, July 5th and 6th are full. There's just still 2 days left to register, July 11th and 13th. And Marla, if you're on, if you had a comment.
I don't think she's on, Lionel.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to put that up as on the days that I think that there's still some openings, but again, there's the registration is right there for to email in. So if you email in, you'll be able to find out what if there's still spots available for that time period. Something that's going to be happening that I thought as I do more and more of my travelers, more and more of my traveling, I'm seeing more and more producers with grain dryers and bigger grain dryers being set up in their yards. So I thought this was something that's going to be very interesting. It's the Grain Dryer Setup College, and it's going to be two dates in 2 different locations. July 11th at the Oakland Colony Farms at Carroll, and July 12th at Red River Seeds in Morris. You can register there. There's the email address for registering, and I think it'd be a good day to attend, especially if you're looking at putting up a drying system. Crop extension specialist, contact information for all the crop extension specialists in the area. It's getting to be a busy time. Everybody's out in the field checking stuff. So if you see stuff, don't be scared to call any one of these people. Our livestock people, again, their contact information, a lot of things happening with haying and silaging that's not too far away. So if you've got questions regarding putting up feed, regarding extending your pasture, give these people a call. Seeded acreage reports are due June 30th. If you've got questions, there's the MASC service centers and their numbers to call. So if you have any questions, give them a call. And like I mentioned, next week, we're going to be having the crop diversification crop diversification centers on, and they're going to be talking about the different things going on in their centers. So it's going to be an extended version. So join us, and we'll learn as to what's going on and what the tours are going to be all about. So thanks again for attending, and see you next week.